Well, welcome everyone. My name is Dara Kosberg. I'm the program director at Reimagine. Reimagine is a nonprofit organization that sparks community experiences like this one that empower individuals, families, and communities to face the hardest parts of our existence, including serious illness and death, while inspiring people to celebrate life and one another. The Table Talk series, which this event is part of, is created by and for people of color and other underrepresented communities that explores what it means to live and die well. A table talk is an honest, lively, and unscripted conversation among health professionals, community leaders, spiritual and faith leaders, artists, and other creative individuals. I want to thank my colleague, Stephanie Rivers, who came up with the idea for Table Talk and developed the first series focused on the African American community, which is continuing this year. I also want to thank my colleagues Zubin Desai and Andy Engel, who are also helping with the series. And Andy just launched a new series focused on the LGBTQ series that we'll be sharing links for later on. And now I want to introduce our incredible hosts for today. Elizabeth Wong and Holly Chan are the amazing organizers for this important discussion and are really spearheading the Table Talk series for the Asian American community. Holly Chan is a user experience designer in Seattle, and Elizabeth Wong is a registered nurse trained as an end-of-life doula in San Francisco. They are co-founders of Death Over Dim Sum and Reimagine collaborators, and it is my pleasure to pass it off to Holly and Elizabeth.
Thank you, Dara, for that warm welcome. And I am just in awe to see all the beautiful faces that's on my screen right now. I can't believe that we have 130 people joining us today. And to hear that we had almost 400 people register for this event is just amazing. It just speaks to the overwhelming need and desire for this conversation to happen. And I want to have Holly have a chance to, say hi to everyone as well.
Hi, everybody. I'm Holly Chan. Dara and Liz introduced me quite well. I also wanted to lead us in a land acknowledgement and setting the intention for today's event. So since most of us are calling in from around the United States, please join us in acknowledging that we are all on the traditional lands of multitudes of Indigenous peoples, their elders, both past and present, as well as future generations. This land acknowledgement demonstrates a commitment to working to dismantle the ongoing legacies of colonialism. As a resident of Seattle myself, I'm located on Coast Salish, Duwamish, Stillaguamish, Muckleshoot, and Suquamish land. If you're curious about the Indigenous territory where you're located, I'll post a link in the chat and you can enter your zip code and find out. We also want to make sure that we remember those who have been murdered out of ignorance and hatred, including most recently Pak Ho, Angelo Quinto, Vishar Ratanapakdi, Kristen Hall, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, Elijah McClain, and far, far too many others. During today's table talk, our goal is to hold space for those who identify as Asian American. Just like how there's not one right way to live or to grieve, there is no one right way to be an Asian American. So we should also recognize that the experiences within the Asian American community can vary greatly depending on region, color of skin, religion, immigration status, and so forth. Today, let's use our short time together to listen to one another's perspectives and help guide ourselves and our larger communities into the future. I'm now going to hand it off to Liz, and she can introduce our featured speakers for today.
And just to kind of create the context for how this event's going to go, we will definitely have all of our speakers just in true spirit of the table talk. It's unscripted, lively chat. And so out of the conversation, we'll hopefully spend about 45 minutes in conversation around the theme for today's event, which is family ties, connections, and conflicts, which we'll be exploring. And then we will leave about 20 minutes for Q&A toward the end of the event. So please, as the conversations are happening, if anything is coming up for you, to just please put it in the chat. We will start to pull those questions aside and set those aside for later. And then toward the end, right before we commence, Andy will be putting up a poll for all of us to answer some questions. And we would love some real-time feedback, just so that, again, it will inform us as we create future content for these table talks. And without much further ado, how I'm going to go ahead and introduce all of our wonderful speakers. We have 4 amazing accomplished speakers. I will go ahead and just introduce them by name, but I want them to have the opportunity to share about themselves. So I'm going to first and foremost start with Sandy Stokes. And she is the CEO and founder of the Chinese American Coalition of Compassionate Care. And Sandy, please tell the audience who you are.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Hi, everyone. I'm Sandy Stokes. I'm the founder and the board member right now, but I'm not CEO at this time. So anyway, we started the coalition back in 2005. And today I saw so many wonderful speakers here with me who are care for their loved one as a family member. So today, mostly I will represent as the coalition member and volunteers. So share our experience during this 15 years serve the Chinese community. Thank you.
Thank you. And next I'd like to introduce Lily Liu, who is the, I love the fact that she introduced, and the way we met was that she's the dragon daughter. So I'm going to have her share a little bit more about that.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Hello, everyone. I'm Lily Liu. I'm based in Washington, D.C. I'd like to take a minute just to give a shout out to Reimagine. Thank you so much for providing this platform. And also kudos to Elizabeth and Holly for their thought leadership in being able to have this type of gathering. I am based in Washington, D.C., where we're eagerly awaiting the cherry blossoms after a very long winter. I have been cooped up as the only caregiver, family caregiver for my mother. Because of the risk of infection, nobody else has been coming in. So this is why I'm so eager to share my lived experience as a family caregiver. I have always been so reticent about sharing my story, but I realized if we're going to make change and have a future that we want to age and die in, we have to step up. So I'm hoping to present a little bit and share representation from the AAPI community. Thank you.
Thank you, Lily. And next I'd like to introduce Tita. She is also a fellow trained end-of-life doula. Oh, and Tita, you're on mute.
I always do that. I can never find a unmute button. Thank you, Elizabeth and Holly, as well as the amazing team there at Reimagine. I'm super grateful to be a part of this and excited for the conversation that's to come. I am a second generation Thai American, and I'm currently living in the Bay Area. I am an end-of-life doula, as well as an elder care consultant and a community educator. I got into this work as a result of both of my parents passing in 2019. And in unpacking that experience in terms of their memories and my memories with them, I've come to understand much about how our family dynamics came into play. And that's one of the aspects that I'd like to explore today with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Tita. And last but not least is Joseph Lamb. He's the amazing founder and creator of Parents Are Human, and I'll have him share about himself.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Hey, everyone. I'm Joseph Lamb, and it is a true honor to be here. Thank you all for taking this time on your Friday to come and have this important conversation. I spent the last 2.5 years rebuilding my relationship with my parents after not having one for more than a decade. And along the way, I realized just how precious and important it was to have deeper conversations and to get to know my parents. But growing up in America, I didn't have the language to ask them those important questions. So my friend and I, we created this game called Parents Are Human to help bridge that gap. We have 50 questions and 20 actions, and we translated all of them into another language, and our first is Chinese. So I'm now working on this full time with my parents. They ship every deck, and we're hoping to translate it into Vietnamese, Korean, Tagalog, and hopefully many more. So I'm really, really looking forward to having this conversation with all of you today. And thanks again for coming.
Thank you, Joseph. And just again, to put into context, and just to get the conversation started, how I came about knowing all of these wonderful people was through my own journey in trying to get this conversation going with my mom. So my mom and I are very close. However, when being a nurse and understanding the importance of having these hard conversations, I didn't know how to do that. And out of my own curiosity and just really commitment to having these conversations with my mom, I took to the internet. And that's how I found Sandy. That's how I found Lily. That's how I found Tita. And that's how I found Joseph. And they were just doing such wonderful work that I really wanted to connect with them, because their work has also empowered me to have these conversations with my mom. And so the way to, kind of kick off this special event of family ties and looking at connections and conflict, I think what we would love to do is just to have each of the speakers share about the dynamics that they've experienced in their families, and each person share how that's been for them, so that we can all have a sense of what's there for us. And I'm just going to say, who would like to start first, rather than calling on people? Jump in.
Happy to go. Thank you, Elizabeth. I would love to start by sharing the raw and real of what my relationship was for about a decade. I mean, I want to normalize this conversation because I think for the longest time, I personally thought I was the only one with a broken relationship with my parents. I didn't know how to connect with them. I didn't know how to receive their love. I didn't know how to love them back. Realizing, I think, having two cultures growing up, they were really at odds. I was questioning my parents, and I had this lens on them that they were wrong. They didn't know what was best for me, that I needed to, like, I knew what was right for myself, and I pushed them away. So yeah, ever since middle school, and the turning point was being bullied in middle school. It was that turning point where I thought the world was pretty great, and then I came to school with a face full of acne and braces, and I realized that, wow, I need to fit in somehow. So, and my story was, oh, I needed to be successful. So I went around and was so busy being successful, I kind of just left my parents in the dust. Every time I came home, they were the only people that I yelled at, that I screamed at, that I took my stress and frustrations out on. And I don't want to hide that, because that was the guilt that I carried with me everywhere that I went. So going through college, graduating college, after starting a health tech company that ended up failing, I was lost. I mean, it was the lowest year of my life where I didn't know what to do with myself. And what I realized that year was that weight that I was carrying around with me, that shame of having mistreated my parents, was the single most important thing I needed to confront. So I spent a good year just finding ways to apologize for all the things that were weighing me down. I needed to let go of that shame. I took the time to get to know them one question at a time, which often were very, very difficult conversations. And because I lived at home, I ended up hugging them every single day. And that was one of the things that didn't require any words, but it completely changed our relationship. I'd remember my mom would just come up behind me in the kitchen and start giving me hugs, holding me. And then my dad would stand there in the hallway with his arms outstretched. And they'd kind of poke at me, was if I ever forgot in the morning, they'd be like, hey, we haven't gotten our hug yet. And I'd, of course, run over. Over those 2.5 years and really playing this game every single week, I started an accountability group with 3 of my friends and my partner. And we said, we're gonna ask our parents every single week one of these questions and see what happens. And I'm so happy to say that I don't feel that shame anymore. I don't feel that guilt that I held on to for so long. I'm now able to ask my parents any question and feel completely okay with it and talk to them about pretty much anything. And I even hired them for Parents Are Human. They retired early because of COVID, so I wanted to give them, or this is now their primary income stream. So it went from, I would bike 30 minutes a day to get as far away as possible because I wanted to work from a coffee shop. I didn't want to be in the same house as them and feel that pain that I didn't need to see them to feel, to now I can't wait to live this life with my parents, to take them around the world, to travel with them, to give them the life that they never got. So a long, long way. And thank you again for having this space for me to share that.
Wow, Joseph, it's so powerful what you just shared. And what I'm hearing is that as complicated as these conversations can be, it takes one person, and that one person was you. And I think a lot of us who are of this generation, we want to connect with our parents, and we have such a hard time doing it. Part of this, your story, is helping us to see that it just takes us to have that courage to be bold, to ask just even that first question. And if we can't even ask that first question, to just hug them. And I know in Asian families that is so unfamiliar, but it's also something that's so universal. So thank you for sharing your story and for getting us started.
Thank
Sandy.
you.
Sandy, I see that
Yes.
you're unmuted. I think you want to jump right in.
I do. Thank you for your sharing. It was wonderful, touching. I can relate that with you because my dad was in Taiwan. And so at the end, I spent most of the time only once or twice a year, went back to visit him. At the very beginning, I did the same thing. I have a hard time to really change the way we communicate each other, because I think in my lifetime, my dad never hugged me, any of our kids, or share, I care about you, right? So I started doing the hugging. By the end of the first visit, I think it's a 1 week visit there, my dad will open the arm, also says hug, and he was saying in English, I love you. I think that's one of the reason we start this coalition, because I'm a gerontology nurse. I witnessed so many unfortunate situations, and it can be unnecessary because people didn't have a chance like us to be able to change the relationship. Even we all know we love each other. It's just tradition, we don't do it. So I really think education is powerful and lead by example. So we did the same thing, CACCC, we have this Heart to Heart Cafe. And this is a Heart to Heart card. And hopefully later in a few minutes, we can share how to play that, because our goal is to help with the communication among the patient, family member, health provider, and volunteers. Most of our cards we play is for the healthy community. It's bilingual, so you can do it in English and Chinese. So I think that's our goal as a CACCC. We're not here to teach you how to make the right decision. We're here to provide the education and with the options, so the family, the patient can make the decision that is best for their needs, their wishes. So thank you for sharing. It's wonderful to know everybody. Yeah.
No, Sandy, this is great. That's why I think it was wonderful to have you both be able to be part of this talk, because what Joseph is letting us know is that we have options, and because you've created the cards, that people who don't even know how to start these conversations can just ask one question at a time. And what's wonderful is that for many of our families, there's so much complexity and given immigrant background, given, us growing up and the burden of us being the generation that wants to fulfill on our parents' hard work and paving the way for us. So there's a lot of guilt and all of that to unpack. That with Joseph's cards, it gives us some way of how to connect with our parents as humans, really, not just our parents. And myself, I'm a labor and delivery nurse. And so I witnessed the transition of birth and how families become families. And every birth that I've been a part of, I always look at that newborn. I said, this newborn will only know their parents as parents. When will they get to know their parents as humans? And so that's when I started to look at my mom differently. Wow, she had a life before me. And I got curious. And I think then when I realized with Sandy, your cards, it really then gave me the questions on how to have that conversation with my mom. And every time I brought it up, it was taboo. Don't talk about it. You're gonna cause death to happen more quickly. And just in asking her those questions over time, we've shifted where I now know her wishes. She's told me what she wanted. And now we can spend that time just eating and dining and hugging, and it's not to say it's perfect. All of our conversations are not perfect, but what you're demonstrating is that it is possible. So with that, I'm going to go on to Tita because she's unmuted. So I know she's ready to speak.
Thank you, Sandy, and thank you, Joseph. I'm thinking about what you've just shared, and I had indicated before that I'm a community educator, elder care consultant, and end-of-life doula. This work is relatively new to me now, and it's a direct result, actually, of the experience of walking alongside my father as he was dying. He died in August of 2019. And unfortunately, my mother, who was his primary caregiver, she died 5 weeks later. And so for me, and I'm the oldest of two. For me, it's been quite an experience to have such loss, and especially given the circumstances as well as the timing. It's complex, and so I've had I've really been grappling with trying to better understand what led up into their deaths, and thinking through just various experiences over the course of my life. And much of what I've come to understand about their lives, they immigrated from Thailand in the late 60s, and they lived here in this country for more than 50 years. And I would sometimes ask, did you ever want to go back, or why didn't you go back? And they always said, oh, we love this country. And I do believe that that's true. But I also know that they had the experience as well, that because of their immigrant status, and also because of where they lived in a rural community, and that was because of my father's work, that they were very much, they were kind of looked upon as the foreigners. And they were always looked upon as foreigners. They were very much, they had very experiences with othering, very direct experiences with racism, because of their immigrant status. And I know that for me growing up, it was very much, there was the kind of communication there was in our family was, I think something that's very common in terms of, keep your head down and go to school, do well in school. And my father, who was a physician, he told me not to be a doctor. That was unusual. But that came out of this notion of, try not to make waves. Don't rock the boat. Don't draw attention to yourself, and work hard and be successful. And I think that in terms of my parents, where they lived, they were very much always very visible because of the way that they looked, but then also they were rendered invisible, both in terms of the community where they were, but again, in terms of their immigrant status. And that was something that they carried on in their whole entire lives. And it has passed down to both me and my brother in terms of the way that we kind of orient ourselves in the world, of trying not to make the waves and not be too loud, and to just, again, keep your head down and work hard. But what I've also come to understand in terms of processing the deaths of my parents is that another element around communication was sort of our lack of. We certainly didn't talk about their hardships. All I do know is I saw how hard they worked to try to provide, and all of the things that they did for me and my brother. And I think, kind of echoing on what Joseph had said, sometimes, you may not necessarily hear the words, I love you, or you may not get the hugs, but the different love language comes through in the doing. In terms of, I mean, my mother, she loved making me these omelets, and that right there was something. But getting back to the notion of, yeah, we didn't communicate about the big stuff. And I think that it was something that came to be the culture of our family, that, we just didn't talk about the really important things. My parents, they would plan and they would take care of some things. But in terms of having, sometimes like those really big conversations, and such as like planning for end of life and talking about end of life wishes, end of life care, we didn't have those kinds of conversations. And so I would say that that really came about as just this notion of there's that parent-child hierarchy that I believe that for myself, even as the oldest child, I don't really think that I really ever came out of that with my parents. And so I think that in some ways they probably just kind of trusted me, like, oh, you'll know what to do, you know. But ultimately, at the very end, no, not quite so much. And so when I talk about, now my work in terms of being a community educator as well as an end of life doula, I think that one of my biggest things is around the notion of communication. And trying to foster, the kind of ties, as well as to create the kind of environment in which you may be able to have those deeper conversations. And I think that what both Sandy as well as Joseph have done with the organization and with the cards that they've created is just an amazing resource.
Elizabeth, I just have to jump in and say what an honor it is to be here with three incredible storytellers. My heart, my soul is touched. I was thinking about how each of us is trying to figure out intergenerational trauma. For me, my story, I realized, is my parents were never 100% for us or with us. And I mean that not in a harsh way, but a literal explanation that the theme of our family has been displacement. Our immigration pattern is such that I came at the age of 6 from Taiwan. We came in the mid-1960s, which was when the immigration laws changed. So if you think about all the elders in our community now, if they had come then as bright young people searching for the American dream, they have aged. And so my father died a decade ago, and I am now the family caregiver for my mother. We had a double whammy because they were from a refugee student group. Most people who lived on the coast of China when the communists took over, there have been books written, The Last Boat Out of Shanghai, or I was able to fly out on the last plane. My parents, unfortunately, lived in like the Kansas of China. So they were landlocked and they literally walked out on foot. They were given one night to make a decision in October of 1948, and the schools took them out. Maybe it was like in England where they thought they'd go to the countryside and return home. They never saw families again. So, first, the displacement and the shock of making one night's decision that changes your life forever. Then it took them 10 months to go south as China was collapsing north to south. And then 1949, when the communists took over, they were at the border of French Indochina, not even yet Vietnam. So they ran across the border and chose freedom, but in a colony. So you can imagine 5 years there in a concentration camp for refugees, literally having to start from scratch. But I want to end that part of it with, at the end of their stay, this group had built a thatch roof hut for the performance of opera. So if there are any social workers in the group, you understand the power of the hierarchy of needs. You go from the basic things, food, shelter, to something for the spirit. So that is the spirit of my parents. They married each other, and I realized that because they didn't marry someone else, we had no family, we had no community. So displacement ruled in our family. Yes, we had an address on the East Coast of America, but their minds were elsewhere, not knowing about whether my parents' parents were still alive. So I now forgive them, but I did not have 100% of our parents.
Wow, Lily. And what you highlight is just so much history that for many of us young people, we're not in touch. We didn't learn about it in school. And I'm just so moved because just everyone sharing today, it's just been such a nice space to have for all of us to know that we're not alone. And Lily sharing about that just has me really present to sometimes when I hear my mom speaking, she's like screaming because she just wants to be heard. And so often it's stories about her past. Oh, I want you to know about this. But as young people, we're so quick to dismiss it. We're like, oh, we've heard it, you know, but we realize we're not giving them the space to even tell us. And I think part of training as an end of life doula, that has me learn how to just hold space, to listen, to give them the opportunity to share it, because at the end of the day, they have really rich stories that we can learn from. And even though we may not have learned it in the classroom, this is like oral history at its finest. And if we don't capture it, you know, then how do we pass this on to other generations before? And like intergenerational trauma, I don't have that experience, but I know my mom does, because she's still talking about it. There's stuff that's still unresolved. And part of how I see myself supporting her at these last short time is she wants to create a movie. That's her legacy project of making. I mean, so there's all these stories that unless we allow the space to hear about it, we really don't know. And how can we connect with our parents? And there's always, and just to bring up topics, because this time is so short, but in there's always this sort of wanting to save face. We dismiss our own individuals' want sometimes in lieu of what the family and knowing their sacrifices. So yeah, just everyone that's been sharing, thank you, because I think each of you brings such a big part of what everyone can learn from. So I see Tita, do you want to say something?
I think that one thing that can be really challenging is the whole entire process of acculturation. And I think when I'm just thinking back to the forum a few weeks ago where we were sharing about, just ideas for possible table talks. And I think one of the questions that had arisen was, what do you want, your neighbors to know about you, or something like that? And one of the things that I thought for me was, there wasn't really anything that I wanted to know, or that I wanted my neighbors to know. That quite frankly, if there was something that I could actually say to my parents now, it's more about, sorry, it's more about that I'm incredibly sorry that that I now realize that I othered my parents, and that it's something that I've only come to understand that really truly now that they're gone. But I didn't really understand in terms of like the process of acculturation and how, for my parents, for them, they wanted better for me. They didn't necessarily want me to feel like the full brunt of the pain of racism. And so, you know, they were like, okay, no, you learn English. We're not even going to speak Thai to you anymore. And I think that part of growing up, you know, because at some point in time, and I hate the fact that like I don't have their language anymore. Like I can speak food Thai, which is useful, but I mean, you know, but I've just come to understand that over the course of my life, there were many periods of time where, having been born in this country and really just being American, that I, similarly to Joseph, like I didn't understand, and I didn't understand the richness of it, and I didn't understand how to approach them to gain their stories. So I'm learning here in terms of all of the wisdom that's being shared. Thank you.
Just to pause. I'm just excited that there's this platform, and again, thank you, Reimagine, for having us have this space to just be vulnerable, to share. I think, you know, my experience with my mom is that I grew up in San Francisco, Chinatown. My mom's very proud of her heritage. She raised me to speak Chinese. I could not speak English in the home. As soon as I said my first curse word and she didn't know what it was, she said, from now on, you are speaking Chinese. And I now am so thankful for that because I'm bilingual. And even in my work, I can use my language to support others. And I do hear the frustration being Asian American. Even with some command of the Chinese language, I'm still sometimes struggling to communicate with my mom. And so I can only imagine that those who have not learned the, you know, the language of their parents, how that conversation can be even that more challenging to articulate and express what is felt. And it takes a lot of courage, and that's something that, if nothing else, that, you know, there's a lot of support and we're not in this alone. And, you know, there's so much wisdom here. And I'm actually at a loss for words. I don't even know what to say.
I'd like to jump in and contribute
Yes.
an anecdote from my life, because that resonates with me, just this idea of language. I am insanely jealous of Liz and Tita that they were able to learn their language. I grew up in a primarily white town in Western Washington. And so most of my friends were white, and my parents, it's not that they wanted me to assimilate, because that was already kind of happening anyways, the external pressure to assimilate. But they really tried to teach me Chinese. Like, they would sit me down for hours and drill me with Chinese, but they didn't send me to Chinese school. And I just, like, it was probably some mental resistance and emotional resistance as well, but I couldn't learn Chinese. And it wasn't until I went to college that I learned any iota of Chinese, whether Cantonese or Mandarin. And as a result, I just have these constant memories of long distance calls to my grandparents and literally not being able to say anything to them, like hearing like gibberish on the end in my ears. And like, they were probably just asking me how my day was, how school was, and I couldn't answer them. And all I would tell them is like, "Wait, mama, well, I need," and that's it. Just like, "I love you, bye." And then when we'd see each other, like, we wouldn't have anything to talk about, or they'd get so frustrated and then they start scolding my parents because I couldn't speak to them. And I don't know. I don't think it was totally my parents' fault. It's just I didn't understand the urgency of needing to know the language and to connect with my grandparents. And they both passed away this past year, so I'm filled with a lot of regret that now I can't now I can't connect to them in that way. But we connected in other ways, and oftentimes it was through like the language of food. And that's why we created Deaf Over Dim Sum, because that was the way that I was even able to speak to my grandparents and show love, was just us feeding each other. And yeah, but that's a huge regret of mine, is not being able to learn my home language.
Thank you, Holly. Sandy, did you want to share something?
Yes, I think Holly bring a very important fact here in United States. Currently, according to US Census, we have about 63-65% of Chinese American, we are foreign born, which means Holly have a hard time to communicate with her grandparents in Chinese. Those 63% of the foreign born Chinese American might have somehow a very challenge to communicate with their health providers in English. And also when they came here, they might come here for decades. They still carry our tradition, culture, and may still have still practice right now. So that means when they come here, including myself, we didn't have a hospice or palliative care in our country then. So after I came here, never know about hospice, right? And particularly our seniors. So during our activity as the Heart to Heart Cafe, we realized we asked them to pick up 3 most important things out of these 54 cards, and ranking number 1, number 2, number 3. And when they ranking number 1, I don't know how many health providers here in this cafe, this group, this talk. Most hospital will say Chinese American is one of the population that will insist to do everything at the end. Even they only have hours or days to go, they still insist to have a CPR and feeding tube and everything, right? So, but out of surprise, out those over 2,000 plus of people who actually complete the cafe, the number 1 choice of that card is, if I'm dying, please don't do any of the CPR or any aggressive procedure. I don't want to hook up in machine. That's their words. So what that means in the hospital, what we saw is the family member make a decision for the dying patient, right? Because I already lie in the bed, I couldn't talk, and we never have a conversation. So my children never know my choices, my preference. So as a Chinese tradition, it was the last tradition, we insist I have to do something for my mom to qualify to be a good daughter, a good son. But in the community, when we do the Heart to Heart Cafe, everybody who doing this card is for themselves. We ask you, if you face that situation, what your choice will be. So that gives us a lot of hope there. The conversation have to start early while we are healthy, while we're in community, not when Sandy is in my deathbed. It's a little bit too late. So I think the conversation is what I think we all can do. That's what I mean. We want to avoid any unnecessary pain during the time we have to say goodbye to our loved one. So thank you, Holly, to bring that up.
All of these points are so powerful because in essence, as immigrants here, I consider myself a 1.5 generation Chinese immigrant, meaning I came as a young child. Basically, we are all part of a diaspora. And that whole concept means dispersed away from the homeland. And so I've often thought about that, which is there were so many role reversals, weren't there? Many of us had to try our best to be interpreters, literal interpreters. I still remember we had this broken down black and white television that my mother called a maintenance guy to come in for. and she just couldn't communicate. So I, as a 10-year-old, had to stand there and hold our ground. To this day, she still thinks he overcharged her. But so the role reversal and communication power dynamics we've had to address. Also, that I know that after Dad died, I am the family caregiver because as immigrants, we are literally just basically nuclear families. Tita could count on her one hand the 4 people that were part of her family. So we have no cousin Sue to call from Iowa to come and help us. So I think another framing of our experience as immigrant family caregivers, as those of us trying to think about relationships with parents, and as the groundbreaking work that Sandy and her team are doing, we have to understand that we have very different power dynamics and other issues because we're part of a diaspora. We are dispersed from a homeland and we came as nuclear families.
Yeah, I'm sorry for interrupt because I have to add this with Lily's story sharing. I know Lily many years ago. One day she called me. She lived in DC, right, at that time. And she came to taking care of her parents, at that time her father. And we have such a wonderful, deep conversation there. And we both realized that, wait, doesn't sound right. Lily is a highly educated person who worked for AARP in the higher position. She has this challenge when facing her parents, father then, death and dying situation, and very, very stressful. How about the people, ordinary person, lay people who are seniors, who are not able to communicate in their own language? Can you imagine the frustration and the pain experience? I will never forget. I think we built a very good relationship after that months of the conversation, realized what we can do for the community. And thank you, Lily, for never give up, continue help the community and support our work. Thank you.
Thank you for being there to turn to. I think, I've thought about this, the living well and dying well. There really are only 2 types in my mind of disease. My father's acute condition, diagnosed and gone in 6 weeks, and my mother who's sitting here. So if there's a burp during this event, it's my mother, not me, okay? But here she is. She's had Parkinson's for 40 years and she's still here. That's the chronic illness. So I think that's why the leadership of Joseph and Tita and Sandy and the team of Holly and Elizabeth, we have had no, what I call role models. My parents never took care of another generation. They were plucked away at the age of 17. So I've often thought the Irish and their wakes, it's the cycle of life. So we have no narrative that we can borrow from. So we're creating it on our own, which is why it makes it so hard. I can see Joseph nodding like crazy, right, Joseph?
And Lily, you bring up a good point because, when my mom came over and then helped my grandmother and my aunt come over because my mom raised us as a single mom. So that in itself, in Asian culture, was shameful to be divorced. And part of that dynamic came out of the fact that my sister and I were girls. So in Chinese culture, they value boys. And so from a very early age, my mom had to, do it on her own. So that in itself led to different family ties and connections. But what you brought up about, just lost my thought. There's just so much going on and just so much being shared. It's just the idea that now, and you brought up about translating, interpreter. And even though I learned Chinese, my mom then also had to hold herself off in learning English because so her English never got out of China, it was never improved. And so when she was hospitalized after the death of my father, I had no relationship with my father after they were divorced. I found out my dad died. And I only wanted to see him one last time. But because he was a medical examiner's case, he was autopsied because they didn't know the cause of death. They would not let me see him. And that was my only wish, was just to see him one last time. And it was out of that experience that had me have a commitment to myself that I will do a funeral for my dad. And that provided a space that opened up a whole other area where subsequently my mom felt ill and was in the hospital. And having been a nurse, I was then serving as a role of the caregiver at the bedside for my mom. And what I realized was, oh my God, just sort of what Sandy and Lily were sharing. I'm a nurse. My mom is lucky. I understand the hospital system. I can speak Chinese. So I put myself down to all the nurses to say, call me anytime if my mom needs interpreter, because not even all interpreters are available all the time. And all the procedures that my mom had to go, she would resist. She was angry. It was such a foreign experience for her to be in a hospital. They wanted to give her insulin. She was refusing, and they had to get me on the phone to explain the procedure to her. And I had to explain the procedure to my mom in the most layman term when it was about her blood sugar. I said, you know, you have an infection right now. You don't have diabetes. And it was her approach to even the taboo of diabetes. You know, there's the stigma about diabetes. And I had to say, you know, you have to get this medicine to reduce the sugar, because your blood is sweet. So the bugs like it. So we need to get the, you know, it was like so breaking it down for her in Chinese. And it was in that moment, it's like, wow, if anyone that was just like a regular family that didn't have the context of healthcare or the language, what position would they be in this? And I think that's sort of what contributed to wanting to be that role for other families, to just support them alongside, so that it's just to help them to understand the process of procedures, what truly informed consent is. Do they even have informed consent when they don't speak English? So those are all the things that I realized in helping my mom navigate her hospital admission for 2 weeks. And then subsequently just really seeing there's a need and a missing. And yeah.
Well, I heard everybody's sharing. I was very touched, but particularly now, Elizabeth, you mentioned one thing. I think I got to say it, which is you talk about for Chinese culture, we more value boys over girls. I have to say something, okay? Look, our society in the world is global. Who is the caregiver? Female, right? And for Chinese American, we have a local California researcher who did a study, a big study among the Thai, American, US, and Taiwan. He chose 3 countries to do a survey, a research actually, to find out any difference between male, female, and which country their happy index is higher, okay? Who can take care of themselves. The self-care is the best. Anybody want to guess which country he find out is doing best with self-care? Or maybe just among our panel here. Can people say, how about Elizabeth? Which one have a highest self-care and female or male? Just guess. Or Tida, or Lily, or Joseph, you're the only
guess.
guy, right? Okay, give a guess. No?
Wait, between genders or between countries?
Gender and country.
Well,
What do
I
you think is number 1 country who can take good care of themselves?
I want to guess Thailand just because of my experience in the Thai medical system. But
It's
I don't
good.
know.
It's good. Okay. Male or female
Thailand.
can take good care of themselves most.
I would say, oh gosh, that's the tricky
I was
one.
thinking females because we already have to take care of people.
Well, I wouldn't say
Females are
female.
already used to taking care
Yeah,
of people.
I'd say the opposite.
I say the opposite, because I think as caregivers, and we're the last to take care of ourselves. As nurses, we'll worry about other people
geez.
drinking
Yeah, I
and
didn't
using
think
the
about that.
bathroom, and we will not drink or use the bathroom.
Bingo. Bingo.
Oh my God.
And then another thing, don't forget Elizabeth, right? To be a good female, not just good wife. How about good mom, right? Good daughter. Are you supposed to be showing how good you are so you cannot have yourself number 1? You have to put everybody in front of you. So unfortunately, the country who did the worst self-care is in Taiwan, female. I came from Taiwan, so I personally experienced. Lily also went through a few years your childhood. The best country is Thailand. Thailand have a highest self-care index there. And according to the research, he say might be because of religions. With religions of most, I think 90+% are Buddhist, right? According to Buddhist philosophy or the teaching that human being, sentient being are all equal. So it doesn't matter you're female, you're male, you're equally important, right? So that's the reason CACCC started this mindful class to help our caregiver. It's called mindful caregiving. And it came from the idea of we support so many caregivers. We are not just help our patient. We don't have a caregiver, the patient won't have a good care, particularly at the end of life. So that's just echo your comment. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Thanks.
We have lots of tears today,
Indeed.
but I think that's we can relate very well. That means
Welcome
we all
to a
open.
Reimagine event.
Yeah, we should have a regular the support group here. I would love to hear from Joseph too.
Yeah, Joseph, please.
Thank you all for your tears. I want to say that I spent 10 years holding back my tears and wanting to be the tough one, wanting to be the one with all my emotions under control. And it was learning to have access to my tears and hoping that my tears can come as freely as my smiles. That's the goal. That's where I feel the lightest. So thank you all for showing us all what that looks like. And Sandy, I wanted to just, I'm completely shocked at that. Not that it didn't, at the beginning I was like, wait, it seems as though maybe it's the females that can take care, but not, but then what the question was is self-care. And I couldn't help but remember and see my mom in that. My mom spent her whole life sacrificing herself. And the stories that I'm hearing now, even since she was little, she would always give the best food to the boys in China. It was just how society worked. And I'm trying so hard now to encourage my mom to take the time for herself, because there's no better time than now. And yeah, what I want for my parents more than anything is just for them to learn how to enjoy life, to put the past behind them, the struggles and the sacrifice, because they no longer need to. And I also wanted to name on the topic of language, I think what I've seen in both myself and my friends, the mere act of trying to learn Chinese and improve it and pronounce words better, more accurately, and come back and ask what a certain word means, that means so much for my parents and for my friends' parents. One of my dear friends, he actually took up tutoring classes, and that just changed the whole dynamic. And my mom, right after I started learning Chinese in college, she started playing English games every single day. And she was like, I want to talk to you now in English and be able to communicate with you. So there is a path, and it is possible. And with language and communication, it also doesn't have to be speaking. We talked about hugs, and one of the most transformative journeys for me was realizing that my mom, her love language was food. We talked about food briefly. And I wrote her a letter one Mother's Day saying, I will never yell at you again for giving me too much food. And that was one of the things that caused the most tension between us. I have to admit that those were such excuses for my past immature self. I saw my mom just completely put way too much food on a plate for one person to eat and try to hand it to me. And I used that as an excuse to just lash out at her, to take out my own stresses. But once I wrote her that letter and I told her, I finally get it, Mom. I get it that you've been trying to say I love you all of these years by making me way too much food and plating the fruit perfectly and bringing it to my room at the most random times during the day. And I'm truly sorry for all the times I yelled at you. And the only way that I can say I love you back is by wholeheartedly accepting it and thanking her for it. So, so much good conversation here. Thank you all for being here again.
I'm so touched because all of this is riffing on the idea of literacy, isn't it? When we think about the healthcare system in America and every gosh darn acronym, UTI, CAT scan. I mean, at one point I thought I was going to, do a comedic act where the entire sentence was all acronyms. So think about the fact that we have had to learn health literacy in order to speak to our parents about any of the medical conditions they're going through, because it doesn't even make sense in English. Then financial literacy, because how many, if we were to ask everyone in the audience, let's raise your hand if you've had the talk with your parents about final details, and then what Joseph has so brilliantly encapsulated is that emotional literacy. And when you come from another culture with another language, we're already behind the 8 ball. So I think this has been a very eye-opening conversation.
Yeah, also I want to say that Holly and Elizabeth, I hope that we'll be able to get this recording and then repeat it and post in our website and through our channel. Because just for Joseph's talk, just this time, I think everybody should hear this, particularly the guy, young generation. They probably carry same frustration and blaming on our own behavior. But I'm so happy to hear that Joseph say that he is able to let go and it's okay to cry. And that's the guy's price to pay, that you have to be tough, you cannot cry, right? So I think I be able to go through this, my lifetime is not always smooth, right? I think the best reason I've been survived is I cry. People call me crybaby. I'll be able to let go with my emotion. And female does that too, right? I mean, just admit that, right? So I think the guys should also quickly learn that, particularly people from Asian country. So thank you, Joseph, for sharing. You are very brave. Yeah, a lot of a hug from all of us. Yeah.
From all the aunties
Yes.
on the call.
Thank you.
This kind of reminds me of the talk that we had with Kenneth Eng a while back. If you guys remember earlier in the pandemic, in the old days, where we talked a lot about being emotionally vulnerable, especially for Asian men. And that's as much of a taboo as death is, at least in Chinese culture, speaking to that, but I'm sure in other cultures as well. It's this idea that how can we be emotionally vulnerable and still feel like we have our own identities. So we wanted to take this moment to transition to some of your questions that you've had in the chat. A lot of you are asking if this recording will be shared out. So yes, we will have a recording posted earlier next week. It'll be posted on the Reimagine Vimeo, and we'll also send that link in a follow-up email to all of you. Also, I saw that someone is compiling all the resources that have been poured in the chat. If you could share that document with us, but we're also going through and combing through and pulling out all the links and resources. So we have some questions from the audience members that we've been writing down. From Monona.
Holly, can I interrupt for 1 second? I just want to make sure that I know that some people are limited on time and and we've had such a rich conversation that if we just want to take a quick poll and just to see where everyone is before we move on to the Q&A. I just want to turn it over to Andy.
Sounds good.
And if you can maybe see something already shared on your screen, just to quickly, and we'll get some real-time feedback just to see what, how everyone, just to kind of assess what everyone's getting out of this. To please take a couple minutes to complete the poll, and then we will continue with the Q&A session.
Lily, there was a question for you from Winona. She was wondering if you've written about your family history.
That is a wonderful question, because this whole group has talked in essence about legacy projects. And so I am very, very proud that my mother, and I think it's important to put on the table that there are other models of parents who do talk, who do tell their stories. So I have spent my entire life trying to learn Chinese to meet her at least halfway. So in the 1980s, she very fortunately wrote down her life story, and I just got it published in Chinese by a leading publisher in Taiwan. And the reason that is important for me is that this concept of legacy projects, even if you may have a language barrier right now, get out that easy to turn on digital recorder and just let them talk, because we're in a race against time. Those who came in the 1960s are at least 70 to 80s to 90s, and we're losing our community's stories. So thank you for that question. I'm proud that I did it, but all I can say is that for me, if I were to put a title on our family story, my forgiveness of my parents the title would be, They Tried Their Best. That's all I can say. They tried their best, given the hand that they were dealt, the cards that they were dealt, and how they tried to make it as first-generation immigrants in a foreign land. They tried their best.
So for all of the speakers on the panel today, what is one thing that you want to say to your parents? Or what is one thing that you wish you could have said to your parents? This is a question that comes from, oh no, I didn't write the person, but this comes from an audience member.
For me, it will be just a very sincere big hug and thank you. I love you, Mom and Dad.
And would anyone else like to share?
Answer's the same for me. And I feel like I cannot, there's a phrase that comes to mind, I can't thank you enough. And I truly believe that the most relevant people to say that phrase to are our parents, because they did so much more than I could ever imagine, because they gave me this life and they worked so hard. So I really can't thank them enough, and I can't say I love you enough.
I think I'd already answered this question to a degree, but before my father died, I thanked him for being such a good parent to me. And yes, I told him that I loved him, but I would say that I'm sorry. My mother, she died unexpectedly, so I actually wasn't able to say all of those things. But the last time I saw her, I did say, I love you. And I think I gave her a hug, and she was okay with it. So go out and hug your people and tell them that you love them.
Tita, that's dangerous. Mother is sitting right here next to me. No, but
She's waiting, Lily.
What's so interesting for me is that I am getting payback for every time I talk back to her when I was 16. It's like, Mom, you got to take this now. Nope, I don't want to. But I do want to say that I am carrying on in my parents' spirit, because when I think about, here I am moaning and groaning after only 6 months of social isolation. Think about them in 5 years in a concentration refugee camp, right? So I think what makes me so proud on this panel is, number one, the action step that Joseph took. the action step that Sandy took, the action step that each of you, Tita and Holly and Elizabeth. For me, in my own small way, I wanted to, number one, bring representation to the issue of caregiving, family caregivers, that we are different in many ways because of our immigration pattern. So I have to explain this bling, why I wear this dragon pin. Is it's a little fun, sort of pun on the fact that we can go from being the dragging, dragging, dragging with fatigue, dragging with worry, dragging with responsibility, by empowering ourselves and becoming the dragon son and daughter. So I think for our generation, it's less about the tiger mother, and the very hard way of raising the kids. In our community now, we're at the stage of talking about dragon daughters and sons who will bring our parents, our grandparents to a good death.
So from Joe, what advice do you guys have to get your parents to enjoy their own life? Like Joseph was mentioning earlier about how you want to take them traveling and such. But what other advice do you all have for what we can do to take our family out and take our parents on and make sure that they're not living in isolation?
It's been hard during quarantine, and first and foremost, because without having to spend money, I am committed to talking to them once a week and diving into something deep. It's not just, hey, how are you doing? And talking about the same things we've talked about our whole lives. It is going and asking them something that I never talked about. And I feel into my body if a question feels a little bit uncomfortable, if there is a little tension in going into a topic. And I've always found that they appreciated that the most. And the other way that is maybe a little more actionable, does take a little more money. I've been looking and asking people what the best restaurants are in San Francisco. And I've, especially on meal delivery. So I've been treating them to the best food I can possibly find. I mean, money is not an issue. It's not a question. It's, I want to have them try the Michelin star restaurants that they've never got the chance to, that they were always afraid to spend money like that, right? They did that for me my whole life. So it seems like an effortless thing to do for them.
Joseph, be prepared for your mother, to start deconstructing. I could have done this dish better. I should have. Just be prepared. I once treated mom to a thing here in DC, and she just took apart the Kung Pao chicken. But I also, real quick, somebody in the chat asked, could we see mom? And I'll say next time, please. Only because I don't know if any of you feel this way, but our parents have an amber type of, when you're stuck in amber, like those little bugs. My mother will not be seen unless her hair is shellacked in that 1960s, what I call the football helmet, right? So thank you for your request, but not until next time when I have fixed her hair and sprayed about 3 cans of hairspray on there. Thank you.
My mom's the same way.
For the last 10 minutes, I want to make sure that we can get some of the audience talking as well. I also want to let you guys know that we know that this isn't enough time for us all to have this conversation. Like, we all want to say something. We all have our own stories. So we're scheduling an event next week, next Friday, same time, that we're calling a tea chat. And think of it as like a casual version of this, or if we had a cocktail hour for this event, except you get to wear your pajamas or your sweatpants. And so we'll have that event posted up. I think there's a link, there it goes. And he just posted a link in the chat. We'll have basically a continuation of this discussion. If there's enough people, and we want to make sure that this is an intimate conversation, so we can do breakout rooms during that, or we can just freely talk. There's no agenda, just people offering their own experiences. But until then, for the last 10 minutes, I'd like to know if any of you have any takeaways from this event. Is there anything that you learned from this event that like maybe you hadn't quite reflected on before? Like mine was just the men and women caretakers thing from Sandy's comment. I had no idea about that. But if anyone else would like to share, please feel welcome to raise your hand and we can unmute you and you can share, not just in the chat. Oh, I see there's a hand raised. Where is it?
That's Wei Hao. I see Wei Hao with a hand raised.
Yeah. Wait, how are you still in the call?
Yep. Hi.
Hi. Sorry about that. You've had your hand raised for a while. But go ahead.
No. So thank you. Actually, a good friend of Elizabeth. It was very, very awesome to be here to hear everyone's story and sharing. So what I got inspired today is that I worked through my mother through a stroke. While my dad passed away with cancer, and what I see is that at the time when my mom had a stroke, and I was seeing her declining, and what the most impactful wasn't the stroke, is all the regrets and heart challenges, emotions she has that wasn't expressed, such as she was dealing with making herself wrong, that my dad passed, she argued with him with like my dad's former affair, and my mom had a business bankrupted. So a lot of those things weren't talked about and lead to my mom depression, and that will further lead her to the death that I see. And also I saw that like our culture don't really talk about spirituality, our meaning of life, and it's like my mom was facing those are the big questions of life. And I saw her spiraling just downwards. And if I didn't know what to do, if I pick up all the books from different spiritual traditions, I just read to my mother one by one. And I just hope that she got it for herself. So at the end, I'm so grateful that my mom will be able to come out of that, and we will talk about all those things that were past that she doesn't have to carry anymore, and empower her to recover from the stroke. Now she's like living like over 10 years healthy after the stroke, and it's a blessing. And I found that like, I think it's important to talk about health and well-being, spirituality, meaning of life, that we don't talk about. And it doesn't have to wait to life and death situation. And I hope that it doesn't. And I now today inspired to really create platforms that empower people to talk about health and well-being, spirituality, emotional challenges that it will cause your health even go further if that's not alarmed right now. And that's what I want to share. And thank you, you all, for your good work. And by the way, I'm also the program host of a platform called High Tea Universe. And it's actually a global community of Asian. We provide a trilingual platform right now in English, Cantonese, and Mandarin that bring authentic communication as such globally. So I listed the resource. Hopefully you guys can join forces with us as well. Thank you for listening to me.
That's amazing, Wei-Hao. Thank you so much for sharing. And we'll be sure to put a link to that so that people can check it out.
Wei-Hao, I'm sorry, I just add one word. Wei-Hao, thank you for bringing up your story with your family, your mom. In our audience, I saw quite a few of my old friends, wonderful friends. I haven't talked to them for years, some of you. We also have a chaplain in our team right now. So hopefully that she can also join our next week's chat. If you can join us, maybe we should cover a little bit about spirituality, and she is a chaplain there. I think hopefully I can talk to her, see if she can join us. Yeah.
Okay, great, thank you.
And I'd love to learn more about your services, so maybe we can connect. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
So I wanted to, there was something that I forgot to mention about the T-Chat that we'll be holding next week. We had a representative from StoryCorps in the audience today. If any of you are familiar with StoryCorps, you may have heard them on NPR or you've seen them online. What they do is they help people record just oral stories from people, and mostly like parents, family members, and then they can help transcribe it and there are sometimes like little animations that go along with it. But Bella will be here again next week at the T-Chat, and she'll be able to give some tips about how to have these difficult conversations and preserve the history of your parents. So remember to join us for that if you want that sort of workshop or tutorial, or just to get to know what StoryCorps is. So Amanda, you have your hand up. Thank you for waiting.
Hi. Oh, thank you so much for having me and unmuting me. And this is just an amazing hour. I mean, I'm a clinical social worker and I've worked in healthcare settings for a long time in palliative care. And this is just such an amazing opportunity. And I've been practicing Japanese Buddhism for 6 years and just a lifelong learner of in working with immigrants and refugees for a long time as well. And my own family is Italian American, and you know, even though I'm not Asian, there's a lot of similarities growing up Catholic and just with the dynamics and you know, I won't go into too much detail, but you know, I just wanted to say that I related to a lot of what was discussed today and what was said and much of the stories that were shared, and I just wanted to thank everyone for what you now I'm like blanking on what I wanted to say, but these end of life conversations, even as a professional who has facilitated these discussions with I've just facilitated discussions with Asian American families, with Hispanic families that speak Spanish, you know, with families of all different cultures, with families, you know, even after discussions, I do it with my own family. So even if you're a professional in the field, it's really hard. So I'm so glad that you guys are doing this and having this discussion, and I'm hoping to join you next week. So
thank you, Amanda. We look
again.
forward to seeing you next week as well. I think we've got time for one more person to share your top takeaway or maybe some insight that you have, and then we'll go ahead and close out for today. But would anyone else like to share? I saw someone mention in the chat that one thing they'll do today or from here on out is to figure out what their mother's love language is. I think that's pretty important in all relationships because people express love in different ways. Some people don't like to be touched or hugged, but they really like words of affirmation, or in everyone's case, food.
I think we ran out of time to share our community resources and also the educational materials.
We'll go ahead and add that to the follow-up email, so we'll make sure that everyone.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No worries. We expected that it would go a little too fast. So Liz, would you like to go ahead and close us out?
Yeah, I mean, we just want to say thank you. Thank you so much for being here, for being part of this conversation. I want to especially thank all the wonderful speakers for their wisdom, their insight, and their personal storytelling. We create this table talk as we go. It's informed by all of the people that also attended our forum. We really want to create this forum to represent all Asian Americans, because even though each family have their own nuances, there are some similarities, many as we're discovering, that we can all identify with. And so this time on a Friday afternoon, 12:30 to 1, it's prime time. So we really appreciate your attendance. We also want to invite you to continue to join us at our first T-Chat next week, to debrief what, a lot that was covered, to have an opportunity to give us time to process and debrief what was heard. We also welcome any feedback as we continue to create other content for upcoming table talks. We anticipate to have at least 2 to 3 more coming up, so stay tuned. It'll be just as lively and just as exciting topics that we hope to cover. And yeah, we just want to say thank you very much and have a wonderful weekend.
Take care, everyone. Thank you so much for coming.